Well, if there's one thing that unites all football fans, it's the feeling that their team has been the one that's been hard done by. Sam, you've had the unenviable task of putting together a luck index to try and quantify how lucky or unlucky teams have been so far this season. Can you just explain the areas that you looked at, what you were kind of looking to put into this piece, and what you came up with?
Yeah, it's a tough task, but I was willing to challenge the idea that luck evens out over the course of the season, which I think VAR has done a good job of suggesting that maybe it doesn't, and also challenge the idea that you play every team twice, because ultimately, if you end up playing Manchester City and they're missing Erling Haaland, that is going to change the complexion for you, and the same can be said for Arsenal without Saka, and last season in particular, if Mohamed Salah had missed any games, then it would have been a very different game. So is there anything that we can track through the season to see how that context applies, was my question. So I had to figure out what was I going to be picking out here, and injury issues is certainly one of them. So I'm steering clear of like a handful of injuries here. Like if a real star player or a particular team's MVP is missing, then I'm going to note that down. I'm also going to try and notice when entire position groups are injured as well and missing, and there've been a couple of examples of that, like if all your centre midfielders are injured, or all your right backs, or all your left backs, that's going to put you in a very tough spot. I'm also a believer in the new manager bounce. I don't know about you guys, but I am a believer. So the next team up after that tends to be the unlucky one, because they probably would have preferred to play them the week before the guy got sacked. And then the last tranche is confirmed refereeing errors. So we've got 6 so far this season where the KMI panel have adjudged that VAR or referee got it wrong. So we'll work that in as well, because that is unfortunate. In a low scoring game, if a goal is chalked off wrongly, that's going to impact you.
And Mark, I know that just from our conversations off camera that you're a little bit sceptical about the role that luck plays in a Premier League season. I mean, when you've read the piece that Sam's put together, what are your initial thoughts? Do you think that it does play a massive part?
Yeah, I mean, look, credit to Sam, it's a comprehensive study. It's definitely in depth. But I think one of the areas that I'm certainly sceptical about is the suggestion that Fulham had been unlucky because they were without a couple of strikers at the start of the season. Well, that's correct, but that's down to recruitment, surely, because at the start of the season, all Marco Silva was saying was, we haven't done enough in the summer, we need to bring in more players. So that isn't down to luck. That's down to Fulham, basically planning terribly badly. I mean, you make your own luck, as they say. So if that's the case, then Fulham's luck has been made by themselves by not adding to their attacking, outlet as they should have. So is it bad luck on Fulham's part? No, it's bad preparation.
Sam, you mentioned the 3 areas that you looked at. Is there anything particular that you pulled out of those 3 areas? The injuries, the VAR, inconsistencies, where you can. I know you can't definitively say this team has been unlucky, but going through your kind of study and thought, yeah, this team has been on the kind of the rough end of things a little bit.
Yeah, there's definitely a few examples, but just quickly to Mark as well. I appreciate your point, and if you choose to go with 2 strikers and both your strikers get injured, then to a point that's on you. But realistically speaking, with the budget that Fulham have, can they actually carry 3 or 4 strikers? Like, do they actually have the finances to roll with that squad? Can they pay the wages for 3 strikers? So that is part of it too. Like, Fulham really realistically can't afford to have a 3rd striker that's really like Premier League quality. So that was part of my thinking. If it's Man City or it's Liverpool, then you should have 3 viable strikers. But further down the table, things get harder to carry those players in those positions. Would you at least agree with that?
Yeah, but we know that Fulham went into the season with issues anyway that need to be addressed. So that, without turning it into the Fulham podcast, that's my point, in the sense that I think that bad luck is luck can be like, say, an example, for instance, not even before Sean Dyche was complaining, I guess rightly, that the Man United's opening goal in the game at the City ground was that the ball hadn't gone out of play for a corner, but the corner was given. That's bad luck. I mean, you can't kind of prepare for that. But if you're Fulham, you can prepare for a lack of options. You can have cover. So, there's different. Luck is different, isn't it? It's not just luck about injuries. It's also about, like you said, different decisions. But I just think it does even itself out.
It may do over the course of the season. We're only 11 games in, so this is we're roughly a third of the way through, and this is a look at what luck or unluckiness has shaped the campaign so far. And you know what? I might publish another edition in 3 months and things have really changed for Fulham. They might have done it amazingly well in terms of getting the rub of the green. But Rob, to your question in terms of what I've pulled out of it, a couple of interesting things. First of all, Liverpool, unanimously we agreed, I think, that with the winning run to start the season didn't quite tally up with the performances. Maybe a bit fortunate to be getting the results. Maybe the performances weren't there. And when you go back through, when you look at maybe the injury issues that their opponents at the time were struggling with, it starts to make a tiny bit more sense. So Bournemouth basically kicked off the campaign without any fit central midfielders. I'm not going to say that because they didn't have a fully functioning defensive line that they were unlucky. I'll totally agree with you on that front, Mark, in that they made their decisions over the summer. They didn't have to sell the players that they did, or in some parts they did. So that was on them. But the midfield issue was big, and you can't play Liverpool without a midfield. They played Arsenal a couple of weeks later in, a pretty big game at Anfield. Saka out, Odegaard out, Saliba limped off after 5 minutes. If you're Liverpool there and you've got the big game at Anfield against Arsenal and those three players are out for 85 plus minutes, you're laughing, really, aren't you? That is a stroke of fortune, because that game should be much harder than it was. So a little bit of context applied there. And then Arsenal, I mean, they've had a lot of injuries. I've just referenced the fact that they've had to play a big game against Liverpool without three of their big hitters. Two of those were absent for the game against Manchester City a couple of weeks later. They went to Sunderland and they didn't have any fit strikers. Don't shout at me, Mark. And Mikel Merino had to play up front. They've done really well to negotiate some really difficult stretches here. And I think it just highlights how well they've done over the course of the first 11 games for them to still be sat at the top of the table. But
obviously you made the point in the Liverpool section that they played Chelsea without Cole Palmer but lost. So this is my point. It's not always a case of the opposition players, best players not playing, so you've got more luck. And I was at the game at Anfield that you referenced, the Liverpool-Arsenal game. And Arsenal were actually unlucky in the sense they were beaten. It was one sensational free kick by Dominic Szoboszlai. So how much did Arsenal's injuries lead towards Liverpool in the game? Or was it just a case of a moment of brilliance by Szoboszlai which turned the draw into a win?
Well, I mean, how much did Arsenal's injuries mean that they weren't able to attack with the same kind of gusto? Or how much did it throw them off?
Arteta's kind of innate caution stopped them attacking. There's all sorts of different arguments to it. Listen, I feel like I've been a bit unfair to you. I'm not. I'm just kind of being devil's advocate in this. But there are certain elements that you can explain away on the other side. So to say that Arsenal have been unlucky and they're flying high at the top of the league, and Liverpool have been lucky and they're struggling a bit. That's why it doesn't. If it was the other way around, I get it. But I think at the minute he's just looking at Arsenal thinking they just be very good.
Well, no, that's looking at it from the results backwards, but I'm looking at it from the performances and the context forwards. So the result ultimately doesn't matter there. Like, Liverpool was still quite fortunate to come across Chelsea without Cole Palmer. Every team that has played Chelsea this season and has come across them without Cole Palmer. And in Forest's case, no Enzo Fernandez and only 45 minutes of Moises Caicedo because of some delayed travel back from South America. These are the situations that I'm trying to point to and saying, well, actually, like, this is where you want to catch them. This is the right time to catch them. If you've got a chance, if you're a bottom half team and you play Chelsea and they're missing a midfield, this is your moment. Now, Forest lost 3-0 in that game, so the result ultimately doesn't matter. What I'm trying to point to is some context behind some of the results and to try and see who's overcoming these kind of issues. I will agree with you that this is no ironclad argument. I am trying to find my way through and trying to apply context, but it's unapologetically unscientific here, Mark. We can both agree with that.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
Can I ask you, there's a part of the piece is about the new manager bounce. There was a situation early in the season when Man United, they were about to play Forest. Obviously, Postecoglou was there, and then he was replaced by Sean Dyche. Now, Ruben Amorim was beaten, 3 times by Postecoglou last season. He doesn't play Postecoglou, obviously, by the time he comes in, it's Dyche. Does that kind of thing play a part in a season? Do you think you buy into that? I mean, I know Sam just said there that he kind of agrees with the new manager bounce premise. Do you think it plays a part in these kind of games?
Look, I mean, I think Forest was so bad under Ange that I think Amorim would have preferred to play Forest under Ange because, to Sam's point, I think there probably was a bounce for Sean Dyche. I think that, they couldn't have got any worse. So I think Ange going and Dyche coming in was actually helpful to Forest and difficult for Man United. But, that's the swings and roundabouts of a season, isn't it? I guess, it's hard to say. I mean, United have struggled against Forest in the past under Nuno. They've struggled against Ange. Who knows? But I think, having Sean Dyche in the dugout rather than Ange Postecoglou. I've written a dentist today, people. You can probably tell that I've got a number. Ange Postecoglou made it a little bit more difficult for Man United that day.
There was something interesting actually early in the season where, admittedly, I am a believer in the new manager bounce, but Nottingham Forest changed their manager from Nuno to Postecoglou and then played Arsenal. And I think Arsenal came out the right side of that new manager bounce. I don't think I've ever said that in my life, but that was a almost unique situation of making a team demonstrably worse by changing the manager.
I guess just on that,
no one was particularly happy about it.
Depends on the managers, because you're right, nobody really wanted Ange at Nottingham Forest apart from the owner. You can make the same case for Graham Potter at West Ham last season. There wasn't really a bounce at West Ham. It was more of a flat line, wasn't it? Ruben Amorim had a very brief, bounce at Man United. It was the dead cat bounce, as they might say in politics. But I suppose it depends on the manager, doesn't it? But if you've got a manager that's got I suppose Graham Potter had proven Premier League credentials, but it just never felt a fit at West Ham and there wasn't a bounce. So it depends on who the manager is, like you say, Sam. If the players and the fans are embracing that manager, you've got more chance of it all coming together to have the bounce.
I think what we're trying to say there is that usually when you change managers, you're trying to make a positive impact.
Yeah.
But somehow over the last 2 years, we've had some teams change managers and create a negative one, which doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
There's no point Graham Potter as Postecoglou, you've got a chance.
Yeah.
just to finish then, Sal, I mean, the start of the piece is that luck evens itself out over the course of a season. And I think we can probably all agree that luck in certain decisions does play a part, whether it's a VAR decision that is proven to be false after the fact. Do you agree or disagree that luck evens itself out over the season? Or are there going to be teams this season that are going to look back and say, we were really unlucky?
So I think you can split that down into different categories. And I think with VAR, I've been reading Dale Johnson's work for ESPN over the last few years in terms of tracking all of this. And look, ultimately, some teams do tend to come out of the season a couple of decisions up or a couple of decisions down. Probably no more than that. So quite close to the line, but a little bit of movement. In terms of injuries, look, if Erling Haaland was ruled out for 3 months and you were one of the teams that got to play them, a team could conceivably play them twice in that period. You've got a much better chance of picking up points off Manchester City if he is out for that period. So it sort of depends. And I'm quite interested to see where the piece goes. I'll learn from the first edition and I will probably come up with a slightly better or tweaked version for the second instalment after 2/3 of the season. And then we'll have a look after the end of the campaign as well. And we'll track it. We'll see what happens and we'll see if it really does even itself out over the course of the season that we look at it.
Just over the years, we're going back over Premier League history now. There's certain mistakes, like decisions that have really, really hurt teams, like the Pedro Mendes goal at Old Trafford that time for Tottenham, which didn't count. The game, the Sheffield United Aston Villa game a couple of years ago during COVID, which ended up, I think, costing Sheffield United a place in the Premier League. So certain instances of bad luck can be catastrophic for some teams, can't they?
Yes. The Sheffield United one, there were 10 games to go in that season. There was a while yet to recover. But when you're down there and even a goal is hard to find, then that can have a cascading effect on your mentality and your, I guess the atmosphere in the dressing room for the remaining 10 games. So yeah, I think we absolutely know that sport is mental, football is psychological, and bad decisions or bad luck, or when you're feeling down and when you look around and your leader or your best player is missing, it's going to hurt you, not just on the day, but moving forward as well.
What would you say, and I'm putting you on the spot here, the biggest element of good luck or bad luck that you can think of this season that's affected a team?
That is putting me on the spot.
The Forest corner one for me, that I thought that was really, really unfortunate because
in terms of
that just has a massive effect on the entire game. United score from the corner. It's difficult with decisions, isn't it? Because often there's another passage of play and you don't know how things are going to work out. That was a corner that probably shouldn't have been given. The ball comes in the box and Casemiro scores. Now, immediately, lots of fans will say, well, but they should have defended the corner better. And that is true, but the corner shouldn't have been given in the first place. And, these kind of decisions do have an effect on seasons. Is it going to be the difference between Forest staying up and going down? Probably not. But you can understand how it hurt them in that moment.
I'll tell you which one I'd go for, and it could have big implications for both sides. And it was the first game of the season. It was the Arsenal goal against Man United when it looked like a foul on Bayern Day. It was given. I think Arsenal scored it, so United momentum was really checked at the start of the season. They had a terrible 3-4 weeks, lost at Grimsby in the Carabao Cup. Arsenal had just got on from strength to strength from that. So that could have been the most significant piece of luck. And people argue that it was the right decision, it was the wrong decision, but for me, it was a foul. So Arsenal got lucky, United got unlucky. And like I said, the ripple effect of that has affected those two teams and also the teams around them, because obviously Man City, Liverpool say that Arsenal were given an unfair advantage, unfair luck by getting a decision that goes their way.
So I didn't factor that into this piece because it was given on the field and then the KMI panel did not disagree with it. And it's effectively not for me. In what is admittedly a very subjective piece, I've tried to take as much subjectivity out of it as I possibly can. And the way to do that with the decisions was to stick to what the panel thought of the VAR decision. So I didn't put that in. But one that was disagreed with vehemently, and my answer to this question, Rob, is Josh King's opener against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge. Now, that puts Fulham 1-0 up. It is wrongly disallowed, and Fulham go on to lose 2-0. Look, it's a low-scoring sport, and if you wipe a perfectly good goal off the table after about 30, 35 minutes, away from home in a local rivalry match, it's pretty damaging stuff. And so that's probably my answer.
So is that more unlucky to Fulham or having no strikers?
Definitely that one. Definitely Josh King is the most unlucky one. Although I will say when they played a game against Arsenal and Joachim Andersen limped off in the second half and their entire back four, first choice back four, was injured at that point. That's tough too.
We're going to take a short break now. When we come back, we're going to be talking about the UEFA playoffs and the prospects of qualifying for next year's World Cup. Well, Mark, you've written a piece about Cristiano Ronaldo and his ongoing quest for 1,000 goals for club and country. He's on 953 at the moment. When do you expect him to do it? And does the record matter?
Well, when do I expect him to do it? Well, thanks to ESPN's research team, we've worked out in kind of collaboration that at the rate he's going at the rate he's been scoring goals the last 2 years, that he'll probably do it by late November, early December 2026. So it'll probably be a game in the Saudi Pro League or the Asian Champions League, but it looks like he's on track to do it by, like I said, this time in 12 months. Now, obviously, we don't quite know yet what's going to happen in terms of his World Cup, whether he's going to be suspended for one game, for 2 games, and that will obviously impact on his chance of getting this record in the time frame that we've set. I mean, obviously, he's not going to break at the World Cup, but that would be a remarkable turn of events if he scores 47 goals between now and the World Cup. But it's Ronaldo, you never know. But does it matter? I mean, of course it does. I mean, 1,000 goals, 1,000 professional goals, that is just... I think Pele did it back in the day, and there's question marks over how reliable the records are because we don't have the same sort of in-depth records that we have nowadays. So to score 1,000 goals in a career, that is just a testament to any player's consistency and dedication. But Ronaldo, particularly, you look at some of the modern day players that are modern day greats, your Harry Kane's, Robert Lewandowski, they're absolutely nowhere near it, and they never will be. Lionel Messi's not far away, but obviously Messi is the only player that can compare with Ronaldo. So I think if he does it, it'd be fantastic. It'd be a big achievement. And people will say, well, it's in the Saudi Pro League. It doesn't quite count. But, we were in the Club World Cup in the summer. I think Al Hilal knocked out Man City. They looked a decent team. I think that the top, 3 or 4 or 5 teams in the Saudi Pro League would hold their own in most European leagues. So the standard isn't that bad. So I think, you have to give him credit. If he does it, it'll be an incredible record. Let's not forget, I've lost count of how many goals he scored for Portugal, but he's by far and away the most prolific international goal scorer ever. So, yeah, it definitely matters, definitely counts.
Beth, what do you think? Obviously, footballers are kind of judged by the team trophies that they win, increasingly now by individual trophies, whether it's a Ballon d'Or or something else. You're reaching 1,000 goals sounds impressive. Do you view it as such? Is it as important as those kind of team and individual awards that these players get as well?
I think it's very important to him, crucially, and I think that's one of the reasons that he's been so great and so successful. Is he is so motivated to achieve incredible things, and if he does manage to get to 1,000 goals, which you certainly wouldn't bet against him doing, it is an incredible achievement. And I agree with Mark. You can talk about the reliability of taking the goals from the Saudi League and comparing them to other leagues in Europe and whatever, but it's still an incredible achievement, and he is an incredible athlete, and the fact that in terms of his endurance, he's able to keep on performing, and not just keep on performing, but just mentally to have that will to win, still after the career that he's had is incredible. I think ultimately team trophies to me matter more. I think to most footballers matter more, but to him, he is someone who is incredibly motivated by those individual records, and that is part of what makes him so great.
I mean, let's be honest. You talk about the team trophies. He's won everything apart from the World Cup. Yeah. He's won. I mean, I've lost count of how many Champions Leagues he's won. He's won Premier Leagues. He's won La Liga titles. He's won Copa del Rey. He's won absolutely everything, including the Euros as well. He won in 2016. Portugal in the Nations League this year. It really is the World Cup is the one trophy that he hasn't won. And I guess, when he started his career, would Portugal ever be considered a World Cup contender? Probably not. I mean, they're probably one of the outsiders to win the World Cup next year. They could do. They've got some great players beyond Ronaldo, but I don't think we can ever judge him by whether he's won the World Cup or not. It's different with Messi because Messi and Argentina, a huge country that expects to win the World Cup, but it's different with Portugal. But I think, he's got all the major trophies. He's got all the individual awards. And if he gets this as well, that would be a different level. Now, Rob, obviously, you saw him very closely during his 18 months back at Man United. First season was fantastic. Second season, less so. But, I think as time has passed, do you think his time at his second spell at United has been judged a bit differently as it was at the time? Because obviously he was criticised quite heavily when he left. He had that Piers Morgan interview. He was very critical of Ten Hag. But as time has gone on, do you think a lot of what Ronaldo said was right and that he's been justified in his criticisms?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, what's happened since he's left has kind of played into his favour a little bit. I mean, you'll remember that one of the first things he said in that interview was that he was really shocked at the state of Man United when he came back, just in terms of the facilities and the kind of what the club were able to offer players. I think he said something along the lines of that it was stuck in the past. And, a number of people have said that since he's gone. I think, Sir Jim Radcliffe in interviews has said something similar. Ronaldo said, I think recently in an interview with Piers Morgan, that he feels that he could still score goals anywhere. And I think that second spell at Man United probably proved that, because I was a little bit sceptical when he came back after that spell at Juventus. He scored all those goals at Real Madrid. He'd done it again at Juventus. And then he comes back to the toughest league in the world. And I must admit, I was thinking, well, I'm not really sure that he's capable of doing it in the Premier League anymore. And I was proved completely wrong. I mean, I just caught a thing on Sky Sports the other day with players who have gone into the 100 club, and the amount of goals that he scored in that first season back is unbelievable, really, in a team that wasn't particularly performing very well. And the one thing that I think he probably deserves more credit for than he gets is that he's kind of redefined how we feel about numbers in general. I mean, I'm just looking at some of the numbers that I jotted down before we came on here, that he's got 226 international caps and 143 goals now. Beth's a bit younger than us, Mark, but we grew up in an age where we felt that maybe 50 international goals for England could never be achieved. Bobby Charlton had 49, Gary Lineker never got there, Wayne Rooney just about got there. I know Harry Kane has reached it and gone on to 70 odd, but we're talking about double the amount of international goals that Harry Kane has got, and numbers like that. I mean, to go through a career where he's probably played 1,200 games and he's nearing 1,000 goals. We're now talking about numbers that define every other player that comes through. Obviously, I see Erling Haaland an awful lot. And if Erling Haaland isn't scoring a goal every other game, or a goal a game, he drops below the standard that's been set by Ronaldo and to a certain extent, Messi. And I just think that you can't put I don't know, you can't justify that. I don't know how you go through a career with those kind of numbers, because it's going to affect everyone now through the history of football. Every striker who scores goals is going to be judged against those numbers, and they're just superhuman.
It's interesting you mention his international record, because it is ridiculous, and you're right that so many players now, I think Harry Kane, like you mentioned, scoring so many more goals for England that you would ever expect, and Lewandowski's another one. And it's a nice little segue into the second part of this chat on European football, because have a guess how many goals Italy's top scorer of all time has got. Put out who it is.
Top scorer of all time, Del Piero, possibly with 50.
No, well, it's Gigi Riva with 35 goals. Italy's all-time top scorer's only got 35 goals. And the reason I mention is that because obviously Italy have had a bit of a poor qualifying campaign again. They're facing the playoffs for the World Cup for the third successive time. Now, they missed out on qualification in 2018 and 2022 through the playoffs. And this time, obviously Italy will be a seeded team in the playoff draw on Thursday, but they don't score enough goals. They had to score. I was in Moldova on Friday where they needed to score maybe 9 or 10 against Moldova to give themselves a chance of qualifying with a win against Norway on Sunday. And obviously they lost against Norway. Norway topped the group, largely thanks to Erling Haaland's goals. But Italy can't score a goal. Now, the point I mentioned Italy is because their coach, Gennaro Gattuso, said after the Moldova game that he feels that the European World Cup qualification path should change. He says that it's not fair that the 7 out of the 10 South American teams qualify. I think there's maybe 9 African teams qualify now, and 16 European teams. Now, 16 is a lot, but obviously it's a big confederation, Europe. And we've got a situation where Sweden, who are finishing rock bottom of their group with 1 win so far, have a playoff place earned because they won the Nations League group, a year ago. Sweden could qualify for the World Cup instead of Italy. So I guess I have some sympathy with Gattuso's point that it's not really a fair procedure to qualify for the World Cup. You have to earn your place there, but Italy won 6 of their 8 games. So, guys, Rob, Beth, what do you think? Do you think that we should change the way that the European qualification process is done? Is it fair, or are Italy just moaning over sour grapes?
You'd go first.
I think it's so convoluted, isn't it? And the past few days there've been a few crazy games. Obviously, the Republic of Ireland one, it was the sort of the prototype of just the craziest night, and such an incredible achievement for them, and huge disappointment for Hungary. But just things can change so quickly. One goal completely turns a group on its head, and it's I suppose it makes for really compelling viewing, but it also makes it really complicated when you're trying to work out who's getting through and who's in a playoff place and who's not. I think the thing is, whichever way you do it, you're always going to have people saying it's unfair. Sweden, that whole debate about Sweden potentially qualifying at Italy's expense. Sweden will argue, well, they topped the Nations League group. They did what was required at that time, and they should reap the rewards of that. But it is sort of mad when you look at Italy's recent record that they could end up not going to the World Cup yet again. But this is why people at FIFA are paid a lot of money to come up with these decisions to try and work out how all of this works.
I think it's to me it's similar to the way that the qualification worked for the Club World Cup, because I remember that we did a pod, didn't we, before there, saying that how can it be a Club World Cup without some of the best teams in the world? Obviously Barcelona weren't there, Liverpool, who were our reigning champions of England, didn't qualify. The issue with all of these tournaments is that you want countries from different parts of the world, but they're not necessarily always going to be the stronger teams. Now, if Italy qualify for the World Cup, would they do better than, say, Cape Verde? Probably. But is the World Cup tournament better for having more smaller nations like Cape Verde and teams that haven't qualified necessarily that often? Is it a better experience? Is it a better show because those teams are there and Italy kind of just have to suck it up and say, well, we've not been good enough? To me, that's the two sides of the debate.
I agree. You need variety, and you need the World Cup debutants. That's what adds the colour to it. Again, I'm showing my age here, but I remember the World Cup in 1990. Cameroon brought so much colour and excitement to it because nobody expects them to do what they did, and they were fantastic. But this strange scenario in Europe, had Romania beaten Bosnia and Herzegovina over the weekend, then we'd have had a scenario this week where Romania would have had to beat San Marino quite heavily, which they wouldn't anyway, for San Marino to qualify for the playoffs because they won the Nations League Group D group a year ago. So San Marino were that close to getting the World Cup playoffs, which is ridiculous. But that shows how strange and convoluted the European path is. Now, there has been suggestions that it should change, that UEFA should change it to kind of mirror the Champions League, the new style Champions League situation, where you've got a league of teams where everybody plays teams from a different path, a different part. So England, for instance, would maybe play one game against Spain, they play Bulgaria, they play Andorra, they play Greece, so that you're playing teams from a different at each different level, but ultimately the top 16 teams will qualify for the World Cup. I think that would be a good idea. I think that would help, make it a bit of a fairer situation and not reward teams for what they did 18 months ago in the Nations League. But, the Champions League for me has worked. Rob, what do you think?
No, I agree that the new Champions League format has been good. I was, again, sceptical before it was introduced, but I was quite impressed last year. My only slight concern with it is that the margin for error in the Champions League is massive. And you had a situation last year where City were absolutely dreadful in it, but still qualified. Now, you can't make that case with the UEFA qualifying for a World Cup because the margin for error clearly with Sweden has been far too much. Now, I imagine that UEFA would argue and say, well, if we were doing this pod 5 years ago, maybe one of the topics would have been that we're having all these meaningless friendlies in international breaks. No one cares. No one's watching international football because the games don't matter. They introduced the Nations League which does matter. And it does matter to teams like Sweden, because now they've got a chance to qualify for a World Cup that really they shouldn't be going to. So UEFA might be listening to this and think, well, what do you want? How do you please everyone? You can't have a situation where the Nations League or whatever replaces a Nation League doesn't mean anything, but also you can't have a situation where you can be absolutely dreadful in World Cup qualifying, finish bottom of your group and still get to go.
I also think as well, from a slightly different angle, I mean, you look at obviously Liverpool, England's record in the World Cup qualifiers has been flawless pretty much. But then you look at the teams that they have played and you think, well, has that necessarily prepared them for a World Cup next year? And, they might play a couple of friendlies before then. We don't know. But in terms of preparing countries, in terms of, I guess, generating genuine excitement within countries, because you have obviously your staunch England fans who will watch every game, but probably the vast majority of people don't have an awful lot of interest in watching England versus Andorra, or England versus Albania, with the greatest respect. So I think that model that you talked about, Mark, about that Champions League-esque kind of model where you're playing people from different parts, I think that could actually help teams in terms of preparing them for these tournaments and also generating sort of wider interest in that qualification process.
We just know that Sweden, with Victor Gyökeres and Alexander Isak up front, when they get a bit of form, they're going to come to March and they're going to be the luckiest team in the world. They're going to have the worst qualification campaign. And some top-seeded team is going to get Sweden with Isak and Gyökeres in top form, and Sweden are going to qualify for the World Cup. And that will be a bit of a travesty on the teams that have actually done quite well to finish where they have in their groups. But that's how it is. And I think we'll wait a while for UEFA and FIFA to make a change. But next, we're going to talk about player care and how football clubs are making it much more easy for players to settle in and thrive at their clubs. So, Rob, you've written a piece about player care and how clubs look after their multi-million-pound players' assets, make sure that they can perform in terms of fitness-wise, mental health, all these sorts of factors which obviously combine to make a player perform at his best. So, what can you tell us about how clubs are looking after their players and what might surprise a few people?
Yes, so essentially this is about, looking after players, but also looking after players when they're not at the training ground, essentially. And the way that it's looked upon is that a player maybe spends, 3 to 4 hours a day at a training ground while they're there. They're under the supervision of the manager, the coaches, the nutrition staff, the medical staff. But there are also 21 hours a day, 22, 21 hours a day where the players aren't at the training ground. And if you're seeking to get the best out of your players, you need to have just as much focus on those 22 hours as you do on the hours that they are spent at the training ground. And it's not a new thing, player care. I think every Premier League club will have a player care department, but it is becoming more and more important. And it's becoming more and more important because of the search for those marginal gains, that kind of 1%. So, player care teams obviously don't win Premier League titles, but they help look after players and get them to a point at which they are able to perform at their best, essentially. And the way the piece starts is that in August, United took us round the newly revamped Carrington. They spent £50 million to revamp Carrington, and some representatives of Man United took us round, and also some of the architects, and they explained why they did things in certain ways. And the one main thing that they said was that they wanted the players to walk through the front door, and the first thing that they saw was not the manager's office, it wasn't the CEO or the technical director. The first thing that they wanted the players to see when they walked in the door was the player care office. And the idea is that the players at Man United walk through the door, they see this group of people who are there to solve all of their problems outside of football. Essentially, you leave your problems at the door and you go into training to focus on the football and be the best athlete that you can be, essentially. So that was a premise of the piece, and kind of what goes with player care and kind of not the science behind it. There is no science behind it, but the kind of the idea behind looking after the players in that way.
Beth, I mean, you've had experience with Liverpool. I know that Liverpool's player care team is quite well established. And can you tell us how they've been, looking after the players in the wake of what happened, the tragic situation with Diogo Jota in the summer, the sense that every player's got the opportunity to speak to professionals in the sense that if this is becoming an issue that they're struggling with? Yeah,
well, that was one of the first things that the club put in place after obviously what happened in the summer with Jota, was that there will be a counsellor who will be available on site for players, for staff to speak to. and to help sort of navigate through this really sort of unprecedented, really difficult thing. And as far as I know, that counsellor is still available to all of the players if they so need, because grief, obviously we know it's not linear. There's a lot of talk at the moment about how much Jota's passing has affected the squad, and of course we're only speculating. We can't. It's impossible to quantify how something like that has affected the squad. But it will have had a bearing on some of the players. Probably some more than others. I think you see maybe some of the body language and the emotion of Mo Salah at points throughout the season. Virgil van Dijk at times looks like he's been sort of carrying a little bit of a burden. And so I think, the importance of having people that you can speak to and open up to is something that has been really important for Liverpool. And, it's the same on the women's side as well. The women's team at the moment having a really tough time on the pitch. They got a really good result at the weekend, actually. They held the reigning champions, Chelsea, in the WSL, but they had to win a game this season. But the struggles on the pitch have been amplified by the fact that the long-term manager, Matt Beard, he passed away earlier in the season in tragic circumstances. And then their former kitman passed away as well not too long ago. So, the human element of what these footballers have to go through is so important. And on both the men's and the women's game, in wider society, we're talking now a lot more about mental health, and that's great that those conversations can be a bit more open. And I think football clubs, including Liverpool, are trying to make sure that those things aren't taboo, and there are always people on hand that people can speak to.
Rob, I mean, just there have been suggestions that footballers now get everything done for them, and I know that certain players who've retired have said that the moment they leave a football club is the moment they actually become an adult, because they're 16 until they retire. And the point being made is that, like you said, they can walk through the door, the food will be made, it'll be perfect food, everything that needs doing. And I think there are opportunities, I guess, for players to take advantage of this. And I know you've got a couple of examples of players that have been, I mean, I'll chip in with a couple when you've done, but I know that certain players don't treat it in the right way, shall we say?
Yeah, I mean, so there is a balance to it. And one of the people who is quoted in the piece from a Premier League club admits that it is a balance. They want players to be able to perform, and they know that things like, I don't know, dealing with a car tax bill or having a dispute with a landlord can tie up mental space, and they don't want players thinking about that kind of stuff when they're playing matches or training. On the other hand, they don't want to pamper players because they know that it doesn't serve a purpose to pamper a player and make them completely detached from everyday life, because that's not the kind of player you need. So it is a balance, and there are examples in the piece about the good and the bad. There's one story in there that a player had gone to a player care team and asked for someone to come around to shoot a bird because the bird was knocking on the windows of their house, and his girlfriend was scared of the bird, and it was basically causing him a problem, and he wanted the club to solve it. Now, while that sounds ridiculous, and elements of it are, the player care team at that club could understand that it was a problem because the player was focused on this bird and couldn't, or was wasting mental energy focusing on this and not playing properly. So they obviously didn't come around and shoot the bird. They bought a £10 thing off Amazon to scare the bird away with, like ultrasonic sound or whatever they did. There are other examples where a manager has completely dismissed a player because a player's been late for training, and the manager's saying, well, that's unprofessional. Like, I'm just not dealing with him. And the player care team's gone to the player and said, well, why are you being late? And he said, well, it actually came from a small town in Africa where they didn't have access to proper timekeeping devices. And he always said that when he grew up, a time of a meeting was almost a suggestion. It wasn't that you had to be there. And the player care team had to go to him and say, well, no, you're in the UK now. If you're 5 minutes early, you're already late. This is our kind of way of life. And they talked him through all that and made sure for 2 or 3 weeks that he was on time for everything. That then made him feel more part of the club. The manager's back on his side. He's getting picked. He's playing better, and everyone's happy. So there is a fine line. You can't pamper these players. Often they're getting everything done for them anyway, but clubs don't want them to be completely detached from everyday life. But there are instances where these players need help, because ultimately their job is to perform on the pitch, and the clubs don't want them having to deal with all these kind of outside noises. And if there's a team of people at the club who can help them deal with that, they would see that as a good thing.
Yeah, I've got to know a couple of player liaison officers over the years, and player care, player liaison. Maybe they're changing terms, but I know for a fact that they see their role as basically being almost like the best mate of the players, and not in a kind of a contriving, but just being the guy in the club that the players can go to and just let off steam and just say, look, the manager's doing this to me today, or my family situation, just to be that kind of sounding board. But again, in terms of taking advantage, I know of one that was basically his job was to go and pay the parking tickets amassed by one of the players, and there was one player in particular that used to leave his car outside the before you had barriers at Manchester Airport, leave his car outside the entrance to Manchester Airport, and he could dump it there because his view was that he earned so much money he could pay the fines. Now, obviously, you can't live like that, so that this guy had to go and collect his car and put it back to where it should have been. And I remember there's the classic story about a Man United player going back a few years where he bought himself a new car and he rang one of the player care team and said, I need help. I need to change my car. My car's broken down. So the member of the player care team went to the training ground and found out that the broken down car was actually a puncture. Didn't know how to change a puncture, so he wanted a new car because it had a flat tyre. So it's a bit like yours with the guy who wanted the bird being shot. Some players let player care do everything for them, even the ridiculous. But they do have a role, and that role is almost like the old days of a club chaplain. There's somebody that could be there just to let the player vent off a bit of steam and just kind of, not burden the club with these problems. Just a matey guy in the corner will say, yes, you're right, mate, I'll look after you. I'll sort it out. I'll deal with it for you.
I think one of the areas that has changed a little bit is that maybe in the past, the player care team would have been completely separate from every other kind of coach and manager in the training ground. And now they're increasingly getting brought into kind of the top table. So there's another story in there in the piece that one of the player care team was working for a manager who really bought into this idea of, not just a player, they're a human being. We need to be across everything. And so he was allowed into these kind of top level manager meetings with the head of nutrition, the head of medical services, all these like key heads of department. And there was an instance where they were talking about a certain player and the guy from the medical department said, well, we're actually tracking his weight and he's lost 3 kilograms in the last however months, say. And no one knew why. And they were sort of speculating that maybe he was ill and maybe he was skipping meals. And it actually turned out the player care representative piped up and said, well, actually, his girlfriend's been away for a month. She's gone back home and he's been living on his own for a month. He can't cook. She was doing all the cooking. He's probably not eating properly. And they went to him and found out that was actually happening. So they were able to sort out a chef to go to his house to cook his meals or to buy in the meals so the meals were delivered. But if that player care rep hadn't been in that meeting, they maybe never would have known what the issue was and why the player was losing weight and why he wasn't performing on the pitch. So while, I don't know, maybe 5-10 years ago, we were in a situation where these player care people were kept to one corner of the training ground and the players went to see them to pay a parking ticket or whatever it was. They're increasingly being brought into the main meetings because more and more clubs understand that they aren't just football players, they are humans. And if you can make sure that these players are happy, you're basically halfway there to getting them to a point where they can perform on the pitch.
I think the thing was, sorry, Mark. The thing is with a lot of these players is, it's easy when you think about the price tags that are attached to a lot of them, but they are just young lads, a lot of them. And, a lot of them have moved to different countries, away from family, away from friends, which, if you take any sort of 18-year-old boy and move him to a different country where he maybe doesn't speak the language and he doesn't have friends and he doesn't have family, you can understand what kind of mental, physical effect that might have on someone. And when you throw into that the pressure that comes with playing at the highest level, I remember the first time that sort of we as the media spoke to Florian Wirtz, it was after a pre-season game, and brought him out this new signing, potential British record if his sort of add-ons are met. And you think, he's an absolute superstar, and you bring him out, and he's, just quite a quiet, unassuming, 22-year-old kid, really not a kid, but it's a young man who is obviously adjusting to life in a new country. And it's, I think sometimes we may be a little bit harsh on players, and we think, they're almost superhuman, and because they come at a certain price tag, they should, make seamless transitions to playing at the highest level. And sometimes actually, it is those little marginal gains and making sure that they've got that human support as well that is really helpful.
I mean, it's only a recent thing as well. this seems such an obvious thing to have this player care team, but I mean, the two examples, and going back a few years, Mark Hughes would always tell you the story when he was managing Blackburn and Man City, how much it was important to him to make sure that new signings were kind of looked after very quickly. So he referenced his move to Barcelona in the 80s from Man United. He said he was basically dumped at the airport, young, only in his 20s, and basically left to fend for himself in a country had no knowledge of the language, barely been out of his own country. But then he compared that to Bayern Munich a year later, and he said Bayern had everything. Even in the 80s, they had the house, they get a house for you, the fridge, the cooker, the car, everything was dealt with. But 20 years on in the Premier League, that wasn't the case. And I think Michael Owen tells a similar story when he went to Real Madrid. Only 20 years ago, Michael Owen, world superstar at the time, him and his family basically left in a city centre apartment where his wife and young family were just left to fend for themselves. So football has caught up really slowly. And I know that there are examples in recent years of players being signed by very big clubs that have been basically just dumped in city centre apartments without thinking, have they got a family? Do they got a family who kids who want to play in the garden? So the fact that these clubs are now catching up is really important. I still think there's quite a long way to go because, it's not a finished art. There are still clubs that are learning on the job, but it's obviously getting better. And, I think Rob's piece has shed light on that.
And it is, and you're right that a couple of the guys that I spoke to for it said that, maybe 20, 30 years ago, there was a tactical evolution in football on the pitch. After that, there's a medical revolution where clubs are really looking after the nutrition of these guys, the way that they're treated when they've got injuries. And actually the human side of it was left alone until relatively recently. And more, and it goes back to what Beth was saying there about Diogo Jota, that, you're talking about, with that one example, something that has had a massive impact on a load of players and an entire dressing room, but you can't really quantify it. There's often in football, we want to measure things by numbers, and the player care team essentially deal with everything that you can't quantify. How can you quantify whether a player is kicking off a football match and he feels all right? You can't. It's completely impossible. And, maybe just going back to Jota, maybe we should be, factoring in that kind of the grief and the devastation of what's happened to that dressing room when we talk about what's happening on the pitch. Because it's very easy for us, and we're all guilty of it, particularly on this podcast, of separating what's on the pitch and what's off the pitch and not really, joining those two together. And the idea of the player care teams at Premier League clubs, and particularly, I imagine in the instance of Liverpool this season, is that those two things are joined up because all of these things have an impact on Premier League players, and we have a tendency to look at these boys and the women who play the WSL as robots and just expect them to go out and perform no matter what's going on in their private life.
Rob, you spoke about how Manchester United, how that's one of sort of the innovations that I guess they've brought in to help give them that extra edge on the pitch. And Mark, I know you've written a piece about Man United's plans to transform the fortunes. Obviously, they're on a good run at the moment, but just tell us a little bit more about that piece and about the plans that United have to try and get back to where they feel they belong.
Yeah, so obviously there's been a little bit of unusual stability at Man United this past month, and I said that half jokingly, but for the first time in maybe 18 months since Ineos took over, it feels like a sense of calm and direction has come back to United. They've had the managerial changes, players have come and gone, they've had all sorts of issues with ownership, but there's a belief now that it's beginning to steady, and the summer recruitment of Cunha, of Mbeumo, of Sesko and Lamens has actually brought that stability forward a bit. So the next stop on the kind of the trajectory back to where they want to be is to strengthen the midfield. They know they need to make the midfield better. They've got issues there because obviously Casemiro has been fantastic this season, but he's 34 in February. Manuel Ugarte hasn't really delivered since he signed from PSG. The situation with Kobe Mainoo needs to be resolved. So United's view is that they need to sign 2 new midfielders, and that'll be in the summer. There won't be any deals done in January. I think Rob has already written that. I think, to be fair to Rob as well, he's written that they're trying to do a deal with Casemiro in the summer to extend his contract. But as Rob explained, that'll be on a much reduced terms. And what I've been told is that United think they can clear £1 million a week off the wage bill next summer. Jadon Sancho will go, end of his contract. Marcus Rashford will probably go either to Barcelona to complete a permanent move, or somebody else will pick him up because he's done quite well in La Liga. You've got Casemiro's wages will come off the wage bill, and Harry Maguire as well. Now, Maguire and Casemiro may stay, but overall, United's savings will amount to about £1 million a week, which is £50 million a year. So United are looking at a variety of midfielders. Carlos Baleba at Brighton were aware of. They certainly looked at him in the summer before being frightened off by Brighton's valuation. Adam Wharton at Palace, Elliot Anderson at Nottingham Forest, obviously he's had a great season with Forest and with England. And then you get Angelo still at the FV Stuttgart. So there's the young options there, all affordable in terms of their wages and fees. So that's why United are prepared to be patient and make the deals next summer rather than panic in January. We can say right now that United won't sign anyone in January that's of any significance.
They obviously need to address that midfield area. I think that the piece that you've written quite well illustrates the issue and the situation United are in at the moment. Obviously, they need to make sure the business is profitable. Everyone will know about their money issues. They are working towards reducing the wage bill. They've got rid of David De Gea. He left on a free transfer. One of the highest earners, Rafael Varane, another high earner, left on a free transfer. You mentioned there, Jadon Sancho, we expect will go. Another high earner, Rashford again. Casemiro and Maguire are different situations, although at the moment, Casemiro, especially the people around Casemiro, believe that he's more likely to leave than stay, even though United are open to the idea that he might sign a reduced deal on highly incentivized wages. So that while they're trying to reduce the wage bill overall, they're also trying to get to a point where United are back challenging for the top trophies. And often those two things don't go together, do they? You pay more money for better players to make your team better. So it's a difficult situation for Man United. I mean, the last conversations I had with them, they suggested that if they can get this money off the wage bill, that they'll be in a far better position with PSR and what follows that when the Premier League clubs vote on that. And they will be in a position to bolster their midfield. I think it's pretty clear to every Man United fan that they're desperate for a central midfielder, or at least one kind of world-class central midfielder. They probably also need a wing back. I think, again, though, it just shows that this whole process is going to take time. And it's probably one of the reasons why United have to stick with Ruben Amorim, because you can't be long-term in your vision for the squad, but short-term in your vision for the management. And you have to be aligned in both of those situations. And I think it would be a disaster for United to get to the point in the summer where they've got money to spend to revamp the squad, but also be looking for a new manager who might want different players. They need to be completely aligned with their entire vision for the club and the team to help them move forward, because it is as well as United have done in the last sort of 2 months, it is a long way back to the likes of Arsenal, Man City, even Liverpool, while they're struggling. The gap to those three teams in particular, and then the teams like Barca and Real Madrid in Champions League, is massive, and it's going to take a while before they can bridge that.
It does take time, and I think I was kind of encouraged by the fact that I was told that United turned down the chance to sign Romeo Lavia from Chelsea in the summer. So Chelsea wanted to offer him as part of the deal to sign Alejandro Garnacho, and United's viewpoint was that as good a player as Romeo Lavia is, his injury situation is too much of a risk. Now, Jason Wilcox had Lavia at Man City as a kid coming through the academy. He took him to Southampton during his year as director of football there, so he knows him well. It would have been an easy deal to do, but United held back from that, thinking that let's not make the same mistakes as in the past by just making a knee-jerk reaction. So they declined the chance to sign Romeo Lavia, and it left them short in midfield this season. I mean, United have done quite well so far, but they are very dependent on Casemiro being fit and available. And as we've seen, when Casemiro is taken off after 70 minutes, United really struggle. So Lavia might have helped them, but guess what? Romeo Lavia is injured at Chelsea right now, so United made the right call there. So, it does take time. And I think, look at Liverpool and Jurgen Klopp, it took a couple of summer windows to get to where they wanted to be. And they made some strategic signings, some long-term signings, and that. I think finally United, the penny has dropped that, yes, they've made some cutbacks. The wage bill is going to drop again this year. So they're in a better place. And that means that they're in a better place to be strategic, be patient, and make the right signings rather than the wrong ones.
And what you're going to find in the next couple of weeks before the January window is a clamour from a lot of United fans to spend money in January, particularly because they're doing all right. And I would suggest that it's far more beneficial for Man United to not sign anyone in January and finish 8th than it is to sign a couple of players, short-term fixes, and finish 6th this season, but sets back your entire plan because you haven't got the same money to spend in the summer. I think it's absolutely vital that United cut out all that kind of outside noise. And there will be noise from a lot of United fans saying they need a midfielder now, they need a centre forward now, Sesko's not doing it, we need someone else in. For Man United to hold the cards close to the chest, say that we're not going to do anything, and we're going to put all our resources, all our money in the summer to rebuild a team properly, instead of using a January window, which is notoriously difficult to do business in. Use that window for a couple of short-term fixes to maybe, jump at 1 or 2 places up the table. It's far more important for United to stick to the long-term plan that they've got.
Okay, well, that's it for this week. We're back next week after the Premier League returns, chatting about, no doubt, the North London derby and what awaits in the Champions League for our big clubs.